Hey, what's up? I'm Ethan, and today I'm going to be showing you how to get your vocals from sounding like this
Shawty, won't you stay with me?
To this.
Shawty, won't you stay with me?
I'm going to be using Logic for this tutorial, but you can use this method in almost any DAW as long as you have the plugins that I'm going to be talking about. I'm just going to be using stock Logic plugins for this video. The song I'm going to be mixing in this video is more of a melodic rap type song, but you can use this method in almost any genre as long as you make sure that what you're doing fits the song. I just want to be clear, do not copy the settings from the plugins in this video because each vocal is different and I'm doing what is best for this particular vocal in this song right here. It is best to use your ears and to do what's best for the vocal that you are mixing. Without further ado, we'll get started with the video. Step 1 would be to get it right at the source. This means to record with a good microphone. I use the AT2020 as my microphone to record singing, and to record speaking like I am now, I use the Rode PodMic. It would also be ideal if you had a pop filter, so you reduce the amount of breathing in your microphone, or the sound of P's when you say reduce that sound from getting into your microphone. Also, when you record, you would need to record with headphones, so the sound from your speakers is not being also picked up by the microphone. You want your vocal to be isolated as possible. This means you also need to be in a quiet room that's not echoey or anything like that. It needs to be as dry as possible. One last thing to remember when you're recording is that you need to be where you're not clipping. That means you don't want your gain knob to be turned up so loud that your microphone is distorting. That is unfixable in the mixing process. It's better to be recording too low than too high because you cannot fix a clipping vocal, but you can always make it louder if you recorded it too quiet. Now that we've got the recording part down, now to actually jump into Logic, and I'm going to show you how to actually mix the vocals. Okay, so now that we're in Logic, the next step would be to go through and edit your vocals and comp them and make sure that what you have is what you want before you start actually mixing. So that means going through and adding little fades at the beginnings of the tracks and where you cut them. This person that I'm mixing for already comped them for me, so I don't have to do that. So I could tell where he spliced his vocals, so I just went ahead and put little fades there so it wasn't as obvious. Okay, so this is the track we're going to be using. It's a beat from YouTube, but the artist bought it from the producer, so he owns it. That brings up another point. If you're doing this and if you just downloaded a beat from YouTube without buying the license to it, you cannot sell that beat anywhere unless it says that you can sell it. If it has the word free in the title, that usually means that you're free to use it for non-commercial and non-profit uses. So be careful about that so you don't get into any legal copyright trouble with the producer or anything like that. The artist bought this, so we're good. So the next thing you want to do, I'm going to play this again. You're going to see how the track is already pretty loud and there's not much room for anything else. And we need to lower that so there's room for the actual vocal. But we're not going to do it by dragging down this fader here. So we need to make sure this is set at 0. Then we're going to go and add this little gain plugin here and take out however much we think we need to get out of it. It doesn't have to be like a certain number or anything, just what sounds like is enough room for the vocal. Alright, so I took out about 10 to 11 dB there, so we have room for the vocal now. So now, this beat is already mastered by the producer, so we don't have to do anything else to the actual beat. This is what it sounds like with the unmixed vocals. It might not be good levels or anything, but this is what it sounds like before we start mixing it, so you can get a good idea of what before and after it was.
Shawty, won't you stay with me? Don't you play with my feelings. Shawty, when you stay with me.
It's not bad, but it can be a lot better. So that's what we're going to be doing in this video. Okay, so the first thing I usually put in my plugin chain is auto-tune. And this is optional depending on what genre we're doing, but this is more of a Juice WRLD type song. And Juice WRLD used a good bit of auto-tune, so we're just going to get this pitch correction plugin right here. The key of the song is C# major, so we're just going to change this to C# major. This little dial right here is how fast this plugin reacts and how fast it tunes that note. So we're just going to play around with it and see what sounds best.
Shawty, when you stay with me, don't you play with my feelings. Shawty, when you stay with me, we'll be forever in love. Shawty, when you stay with me, don't you play with my feelings. Shawty, when you stay with.
Okay, so that sounded good to me. Yours will depend on the vocal that you're mixing, so do not copy any of the plugins settings that I do. Before we move on, there's also this thing called flex pitch. So if you don't want to use the actual pitch correction plugin, you can go in here and tune these notes to make them basically perfect, but you don't want to do it too much because it can sound robotic. We're just going to stick with pitch correction and not the flex pitch. The next thing I usually do is subtractive EQ. What we're going to do is only take out frequencies. That means only reduce the frequencies. We'll add some later, but this is just reducing it. The human voice usually cuts off about here, so we don't need any of this below here. So we're just going to take this high pass and cut off anything that is below that right there. This will cut down any room rumble or like the washing machine on the other side of the house, or if you recorded with the air conditioner on, it'll cut off the rumble of that, or cars going down the road or anything like that. Also, a thing to keep in mind, do not solo out the vocal when you do this, so you can see how it'll sound in your mix when you EQ. Okay, so I just kind of went through and kind of fine-tuned this to make sure I got what I wanted, and this is what I have so far. I cut out some boxy frequencies right here, and the next step for subtractive EQ is to go through and find any ringing frequencies that we find to be annoying. So we're just going to take one of these and make it really thin and go sweeping through and finding annoying frequencies. Don't take out too many of these because it'll make your vocals sound really empty.
With my feelings, shawty, when you stay.
See, that was kind of ringing there, so I'm just going to take that out by a little bit. Don't take it out too much. So I'm not going to go into too much detail just for the sake of time in this video, but that's basically how you do that. The next step in the vocal mixing process is your first round of compression. Go get our compressor. Basically, to explain what a compressor does, it takes the loud parts of the vocal and makes them quieter so they match volumes with the quiet part of the vocal, so it's a more consistent sound overall. The threshold is at what point the compressor will start compressing the audio. So once it passes negative 20.5 dB right here, for example, it'll start compressing. And what the ratio is, the more to the left is less and more to the right is more. You can get by just knowing that, but I want to explain it just a little bit more. So what this ratio up here means is for every 2 decibels that it goes past this threshold, only let through 1 decibel. So that's basically like cutting that signal in half and letting half of that signal through once it passes that threshold. And the same thing for 3 decibels. For every 3 that passes this threshold, only let 1 of those decibels through. So it's cutting it down into a third. Most of the time for pop vocals and for rap vocals like this, anything between 2 and 5 or 6 would probably be your best bet. A compressor usually makes the vocal quieter. So what we can do is we can add makeup gain to make it louder. So however much you're taking out, so like if this needle is on 4 right here, you can add 4 dB to make it the same volume again, because it's taking out 4 dB. So I'm just gonna listen and see what sounds best for me.
With me, don't you play with my feelings, shawty, when you stay with me, we'll be forever in love.
Okay, so that's what sounds good to me. This might not be the quote-unquote correct way to do this, but that's what sounded best for me. So now we're going to apply makeup gain. So let's see what our graph is at.
Shawty, when you stay with me, don't you play with my feelings.
It usually stays around in between 4 or 5. So I'm gonna put 4.5 dB back, so it's basically the same. The next step in the process would be additive EQ. So now that we've taken out some of the frequencies that we don't want, we can go in and actually add frequencies. What I usually do is just to brighten it up, I usually put a high shelf filter. So this boosts everything above this point right here, and it just gives it more air and it makes it a lot brighter. So I'm just gonna listen and adjust accordingly.
Shawty, when you stay with me, don't you play with my feelings. Shawty, when you stay with me, we'll be forever in love. Shawty.
Alright, so that sounds good to me. It sounds a lot better, in my opinion, than it did before. It's a lot brighter. It just sounds a lot cleaner to me. Okay, another thing. You can do whatever you want when you are making your music, because there are no rules, and even if there are rules, they are meant to be broken, and people break them all the time. You can do whatever you want, and it's your art. I just wanted to be clear on that. So for the additive EQ, just for the sake of this video, I'm just going to add this high shelf here. But you can go through and you can boost certain frequencies by a lot to see what they sound like. And if you like them, you can kind of boost them a little bit to make them pop out more in your vocal. A high shelf right here usually sounds good for most vocals, but some songs are more dark, so you would need a darker vocal. So you could even reduce this if you wanted a darker vocal. I'm just going to leave it here like it was, because that's what sounds good to me. The next step would be to add another compressor. This one's going to be not as much compression as the first compressor we added. It's just to control it just a little bit more. So I'm just going to go through and make sure it's what I want.
When you stay with me, we'll be forever in love. Shawty, when you stay with me, don't you play with my feelings. Shawty, when you stay with me, we'll be forever in love. Woke up one day not seeing you by my side, wondering if that day I was gonna die. Got backstabbed too many times.
Okay, so that's what sounds good to me. Not as much compression and a lot smoother than the first compression. Please do not copy everything that I do word for word, setting for setting, because each vocal is different. This is what I thought was needed for this vocal, so this is what I'm doing for this vocal. But your vocal might not need a second compressor or whatever, so just use your ears. The next step I usually do is I add a little bit of saturation. This is also optional. I just think it gives it a little more flavor. Since we're using stock plugins, I'm gonna go over here and go to multi-effects. I usually go to fat effects right here. It's kind of a funny name, but I go here and then I disable everything except this distortion right here. And I use this soft saturation knob right here. So I'm gonna go through and listen to see what sounds best for me.
Stay with me, we'll be forever in.
You don't want to add too much like that because it obviously sounds bad. Just a little bit is gonna do the job for you.
Woke up one day not seeing you by my side, wondering if that day I was gonna die. Got backstabbed too many times.
Okay, so that's what sounds good for me. I say that every time, I'm sorry. I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna add this exciter. What this does is it's kind of like the saturation we just added, but it only adds it to this one specific frequency right here. And I usually just do it to make it a little bit more bright and make it shine a little bit more. I'm gonna solo out this vocal right quick just so I can see which part of the vocal I want it to add harmonics to. Okay, so I chose right here around 7,000 hertz. It's gonna be different for every vocal that you do, so just keep that in mind. What you gonna want to do for yours is choose the right one and make sure you can hear it very well by boosting it a lot. And then you want to bring it down all the way and then kind of bring it in slowly until it sounds like what you want.
Shawty, when you stay with me, don't you play with my feelings. Shawty, when you stay with me, we'll be forever in love. Shawty, when you stay with me.
You don't want it to be obvious, you just want it to make it a little brighter. An exciter can be used for a bunch of different things, but that's just what I used it for. Now that we're done with all the regular effects, we can add stuff like reverb and delay to our vocal. Typically, you're going to want to put them on a send rather than other tracks, especially if you have a whole bunch of different vocal tracks. So I'm just going to make a new bus. I'm just going to put it on bus 3. Now this is a bus. You're basically sending the audio from this track to this track, and you're going to only put the reverb on this track. So I'm just going to put Space Designer on here. That's what I use. You can use pretty much any reverb that you like. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to go through and listen to a bunch of these and see what fits it best. So I'm going to cut the video and play around with it, and then I'll be back. So I liked the sound of the soft plate reverb in here. So you just go to medium spaces, plate reverbs, and then the soft plate.
With my feelings.
It just sounds like he's in a kind of medium-sized hall or something, and he's singing in that hall. We don't need it to be a lot since the song doesn't call for a bunch of reverb, so we're just going to blend it in to where we can barely hear it, but it just gives it a little bit of space.
Shawty, when you stay with me, don't you play with my feelings. Shawty, when you stay with me, we'll be forever in love. Shawty, when you stay with me, don't you play with my feelings.
Alright, so I just sent negative 18.7 to this bus. So that's all for the reverb. Right, the next step for putting effects on there is to add delay. Usually I put it on another send by itself, so I would just make another bus. But since there's only one vocal track, we can get away with just putting the delay on the actual track. And you can do that with the reverb too, as long as there's only one track and you're not going to be using a bunch of different tracks, because that will use up your CPU and make your workflow a lot slower. I usually use stereo delay. It sounds the best to me. I don't want this to be like a big ongoing delay, so I'm just going to turn the feedback down to 0 so it only repeats once.
Shawty.
Like that. But I want it to be a little closer together. I just want it to give it a little bit more room.
When you stay with me, don't you play with my feelings. Shawty, when you stay with me, we'll be forever in love. Shawty, when you stay with me, don't you play with my feelings.
We don't want anything to be distracting us from the actual vocal, because that is what people pay attention to the most, is the vocal, and not like the effects on the vocal. Couldn't really find any sibilance that was harsh or annoying, so I'm just gonna not put a de-esser because I don't think it really needs it. Okay, so now I think this is pretty much close to the final product. Now that we've got the vocal mixed to where it sounds good, we can start getting creative with it. One spot that I realized sounded really good for a creative thing is right here. I'll play that for you right now without the creative.
I remember those days we had fun, thinking we was gonna be one. Go ahead and choose.
So that could use some spicing up right there. That could be really fun to work with. We're just gonna duplicate the track, and I'm using Command D if you're on Mac. We're just gonna cut that out and bring it down here to a new identical track.
Thinking we was gonna be.
That word one right there. I'm just going to use my scissors tool to cut it and bring it down.
Thinking we was gonna be one.
We're gonna need to get our fade tool and hold down Command and put some fades there so there's no clicking. Alright, so what I wanted to do is I wanted to automate some reverb to where it sounds really big and huge and stuff. I'm just going to go to this bus right here and duplicate this reverb right here and bring it down here. And it's going to turn off this bus for this one track. We're going to turn the dry all the way up and the wet all the way up. And that's not going to sound too good right now. So this is what it sounds like now. See, that just doesn't sound good. So what we're going to do is we're just going to make some automation for that reverb right there. So I'm just going to pull up my automation. I'm not sure how to do this in any other DAW, but this is how you do it in Logic. I'm sure there's somewhere on the internet to explain how to do it in some other DAW that you're using. So we're just going to go to this automation right here and go to our space designer. We're just going to automate the wet output. All right, so it's all the way up right now, as you can see. So we're just going to turn this down to double click to add that point right there and make another one over here. So I just want it to turn up slowly as the vocal presses on. So this is what that sounds like.
We was gonna be one. Go ahead and choose.
Now that sounds cool and all, but I also wanted to add another stereo delay. This one's going to be a little bit more obvious than the other one, so we're just going to turn it up about 24-25%. There's a lot of presets here. I think this is going to sound the best.
Be one.
Alright, so that was a little too late, so we're just going to bring that back a little bit more. This is basically just all about fine-tuning it to make sure it sounds the very best that you can get it.
Thinking we was gonna be one. Go ahead and
Oh wait, I need to make sure the feedback is turned down, so it only repeats once.
gonna be one. Go ahead.
Turn this down a little bit more.
Go ahead and choose.
Nice. And also for the outro, maybe to where it pans left and right. So I'm just going to go get my scissors tool and cut out that part and make another duplicate track of the audio 1 here and put it down here. And move that down here. Also want it to be a little more spacey, so I'm going to turn up this reverb send right here a little bit more. So we're just going to automate the panning. I kind of want it to move from the left ear to the right ear and then back again. So I'm just going to put a point here and kind of put one in the middle and put one at the end. And make this here and make this here. The last step in this video that I'm going to be showing you is to make a fade out, because that is what the artist requested, is that I do a fade out. So I'm just going to create a track automation to it to fade out on the main output there. So there's the stereo out, and it's going to slowly fade out as that outro is happening. So let's listen to that. Alright, so that is basically it. Good luck making music out there, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope this taught you something, and I hope you learned something from this. If you have any critiques for me and saw something that I was doing and you thought it was wrong, let me know, because I'm always down to improve as a mixing engineer and a producer. So I'll just end it here.
Shawty, when you stay with me, don't you play with my feelings. Shawty, when you stay with me, we'll be forever in love. Shawty, when you stay with me, don't you play with my feelings.